So J.T. Clark will be here, and he'll tell you all that's going on. But there is even so much bigger to his story as we got to write in that begins even before where he's going to begin today. It's a lot's taking place for his life. But you're going to get a little bit of a picture of what God's done in his life. So let me pray for him as he comes up. Lord God, we give you thanks that you would love us enough to be calling us as your children to the foot of the cross and to know of your forgiveness each and every day, each and every moment of the day for the things that we've done and things that others have done to us. So Lord, may your forgiveness ring true in our hearts, in our minds, and even in our life, that we would walk in forgiveness and walk in grace and mercy, that we might spread your kingdom throughout all of your creation. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning. As you said, my name is J.T. Clark, and I want to begin this morning by thanking the leadership here at Hope Presbyterian for inviting me in to have an opportunity to share a little bit of a message with you about what's happened in my life. And before I get into the details of this, I want to remind myself that all glory goes to God. And I got to remind myself this is not about me. And it was October 31st, after some of these events had transpired, when I was talking with Michael Harrison with Community Fellowship Church. And I was trying to understand what had all transpired. And his reaction to me was, this is not about you. And it forced me to look differently at the circumstances involved in this situation. To begin the story, I need to tell you a little bit about my brother and his wife. They were married for 39 and a half years. They lived twice as long on this earth as a couple as they did as individuals. In 1993, they moved to Floyd, where he worked for the Department of Emergency Services as a hazmat response officer. You see, their lives had been filled in service to other people. Before he was a hazmat response officer, he was a fireman in Fairfax County. He served as an emergency services coordinator in the county of Pulaski, also in Floyd County. He too was ordained as a pastor. His wife, Pam, she was a nurse. She worked in the operating room, tending to the sick and injured. She worked in home care. And at the end of her life, she worked in hospice. And she held the hands of those that were finishing their journey here on this earth. Bobby and Pam also served as missionaries. And for 2 years, they sacrificed their life here in America to go serve God's people in China. One other thing that you need to know about my brother, in his service to his Lord, he lived a life that was non-judgmental and accepting of other people and their situation. And in contrast, in my life, I was very judgmental. I had heard a great deal. And I looked down on other people's situations to help me feel better about my own. And every time that I rejected my brother and his Lord, and I pushed him away, when I would have a softening and I would come back to him, my brother would be standing there with his arms open. I got you, boy. I got you. August 21st was a Friday night. My brother lives in Floyd. As I mentioned, I live in Franklin County. And on this particular night, we were both in Bassett. He didn't know I was there. I didn't know he was there. He had traveled from Floyd County on that Friday night with a group of bikers to worship at Trash Ministries up off Virginia Avenue. That same night, I was volunteering at the high school football game with Bassett High School. I was a member of the chain crew first down, second down, keep track of all that kind of stuff. Well, when you're assigned to the chain crew, you work the visiting team sideline. It just so happens Bassett was playing Floyd County in the game that night. And as the game wore on, I was making jokes with the guys on the sideline about my brother. That's what we do, right? In the second half of the game, an ambulance that had been assigned to the game in case somebody got injured had to leave. About a half a mile from the stadium, that ambulance developed a mechanical problem and caught fire. That's Route 57A. Those of you in this community understand where that's at, just past the CVS. At the stadium, we saw the column of smoke, wondered what was going on. We could hear the explosion of the oxygen canisters as that fire raged out of control. The game ended. I got in my car. I made a right turn to head to 220 and back to Franklin County. There was a gentleman that attended that football game with his 15-year-old son, a student at Bassett High School. He left as well. He made a left turn to go home. He lived down Route 57A toward where that ambulance fire was. The road had been shut down because of that fire, and he was detoured around behind the CVS to come back out on T.B. Stanley Highway to make a left to go over to 57 and finish his travels home. At the same time, my brother was leading that delegation back to Floyd. And what I've come to learn is my brother understood that the ambulance fire was on 57. And so my brother made a left turn off of 57 onto T.B. Stanley Highway to come over to 57A. And as the driver of the truck approached T.B. Stanley Highway from that detour, when he made a left turn, he accidentally turned into the wrong travel lane that my brother and his wife were in. And as my brother tried to avoid the pickup truck, Bobby and Pam were thrown from the motorcycle under the wheels of that truck. The motorcycle never hit the truck. And they were killed instantly, called home. They were traveling home to Floyd, but they were called home to be with our father. The folks at Trash Ministries got word that an accident had happened and one of their own had been injured or worse. And they charged out of the church to go see what had happened and what they might do. Mike Price, the pastor of Trash Ministries, told me they had difficulty penetrating the perimeter of the scene. And they made their way in and learned what had happened. And instantly their thoughts turned to the driver of the truck. And they saw the devastation that this father and son were experiencing. And this group of bikers surrounded this father and son in prayer and prayed that that 15-year-old boy would not be harmed by what he had witnessed, and lifted that man up in prayer that he too might be protected. And one of the EMS aid workers that had responded to the scene to help my brother and his wife came up to Mike Price and poked him in the chest and said, "I want to know the God you serve," and accepted Christ right there at the scene of that accident. That's all happening on Friday night. My brothers and sisters are interceding on behalf of our family because we don't even know what's happened. I was a mile from my brother the whole evening. And about the time that accident happens, I'm pulling into my driveway at home, unaware. At 1:30 in the morning, my mother calls me. And in a broken voice, she said, "Your brother and sister are no longer with us." And she begins to tell me a little bit about what she knows. And she doesn't know a whole lot. The details just aren't clear. And as she tells me this all happened in Bassett, I couldn't believe it. I was just there. On Sunday, my brother's daughter, who also is a nurse following in her mother's footsteps, who now works for the same agency her mother had worked for, telephoned Mr. Martin, the driver of that pickup truck, and his family. Less than 48 hours after that accident, she's telephoning them to let them know she understood it was an accident and that we as a family were going to move on a path of forgiveness. On Tuesday, my mother lives in Northern Virginia. The funeral was going to be visitation Thursday, funeral Friday. She was not going to come down till Thursday. So every day I was calling to check on her. I'm from a large family, 6 kids. Bobby was the oldest. And on this Tuesday, I called to check on her. And my sister answered the phone and she said, "It's not a good day." And I said, "That's okay." I said, "Just let her know I called, and I'll call again tomorrow. If she feels like it, she can call me later." About 10 o'clock that night, the phone rang. And it was my mother. And in a broken, coarse voice, she asked, "Did your sister tell you?" I was like, "No, Mom." She didn't say anything. She just said it wasn't a good day. She said, "I got a letter from your brother today." You see, my brother, who at every step in his life wanted to be connected to people, had taken time to handwrite my mother a letter, letting her know how much he loved her, how good a job that she had done as a mother to us 6 kids. My father had passed in '88. He wasn't alive any longer. But he wanted her to know how he had regretted missed opportunities to spend in her company, and how much he was looking forward to coming and visiting her for her birthday in September and sitting on the front porch, having a cup of coffee and talking. And as my mother finished explaining to me what that letter contained, I said to her, "What a treasure. What a treasure. His last thoughts were of you. You know exactly how he felt." And in an instant, I could sense, almost see a smile come back across that phone line, that she knew what she held in her possession. The next day, Wednesday, I got a phone call asking if I would deliver the eulogy on behalf of the family. Friends, I hadn't been in church in 5 years. My brother, who was a pastor, who had tried to pull me closer to a relationship with God, I didn't get it. And I pushed back. And here I was asked to speak on behalf of the family. There were more than 500 people in this church that had come to worship, celebrate his life. On that Friday, Bobby and Pam were placed in the same coffin and buried in the same cemetery plot in Floyd. His arm wrapped around her shoulder, resting inside where she had spent 39 and a half years as a couple. That night, unbeknownst to the family, a vigil was held back at the accident site. And if you read the article, you probably know this already, but the driver of that pickup truck was a pastor of an African American church in Bassett, House of Purpose Ministries. And the folks from the African American House of Purpose Ministries and the folks from Trash Ministries, a biker church, came together on TV Stanley Highway and held a vigil in worship to God, in celebration of my brother and his wife's life, and to lift up C.J. Martin and his family. And the state trooper who had investigated that accident came back the night of that vigil off duty, dressed in blue jeans and a t-shirt, because there was something different going on in this situation. The Friday after the funeral, C.J. Martin and leaders from his church traveled to Floyd to visit with my niece and her family. I can't imagine what that experience would have been like as they made that drive from Bassett to Floyd, and the anxiety that might have been coursing through them. And as they traveled up the driveway, C.J. shared this with me, and they came to a stop. My niece burst through the front door of her house and sprinted to CJ to wrap her arms around him and tell him, "I love you." I'm going to move forward just a little bit. C.J. Martin was charged in the accident. And about 5 days before his court date, I got a stirring in me that I needed to find out about it and plan to be there. Now, I already told you a couple things, that our family had moved on a path of forgiveness and that I hadn't been in church in 5 years. I didn't want to go to court that day because I didn't want to screw it up. Excuse me. I didn't want to mess it up. If I go there and I break down and the judge comes down harder on him because I showed up, I resisted. On the 26th of October, it's a Monday, I went to work. I'm sitting at my desk at 9 o'clock. By 10 o'clock, that feeling that I talked about for 5 days got so strong I could no longer sit there. And I had to make the trip south from Roanoke to Henry County. 45 minutes into that drive, I'm south of Rocky Mount, not quite to Henry County. A message comes across my heart that says, "I need you to pay the fine." Pay the fine? That could be thousands of dollars. My wife doesn't know where I'm going. My family doesn't know where I'm going. What do you mean you need me to pay the fine? The next message, "You don't worry about a thing. You show up and be ready to pay the fine and I'll make a way." So I got to the courthouse 2 hours early, found a seat 4 rows back, and I've kind of reconciled that I'm going to watch this thing play out. Whatever happens, I'll go to the clerk, I'll write a check, and then I'll figure out how I'm going to explain this to my wife when I get home. As I'm sitting there 45 minutes into this process, other cases are coming before the judge. A message comes across my heart that says, "I need you to get up and tell that state trooper who you are and why you're here." Well, there's 3 of them talking up in the corner of the courtroom, and I got up and I walked over and I stood a few feet away from them, trying to figure out which one investigated the accident. I realized who Trooper Bird is. I walked over to him. I said, "Sir, my name's J.T. Clark. I'm the brother and brother-in-law of the 2 that were killed. And I came to pay any fine they imposed in this case." He kind of looked at me with a puzzled look. And he turned and he picked up his investigation folder and he walked me back over to where I had been seated. And we sat down and he leaned into me and he said, "What did you say to me?" I said, "Sir, I came to pay the fine." He said, "I've been doing this 37 years and I've never heard anything like this before in my life." And he opened up that folder and he proceeded to walk me through the circumstances of that accident. And when he got done, he said, "There's a couple things you need to be aware of. When I presented this evidence to the Commonwealth's attorney, vehicular manslaughter charges were considered in this case." He said, "No family that I've ever worked with ever wants less punishment. Everybody always wants more. He said, without talking to the family, in consideration of the evidence and the sense that there was just something different about this case, he said, I pushed back. And I said, not here. Not in this case. And so C.J. Martin was charged with reckless driving. He said, the other thing you need to be aware is I've been through something very similar in my own life. And I'm still trying to deal with the circumstances of that. And you're going to walk in here and pay a man's fine. And he got up and he walked away shaking his head. Another 45 minutes passes and the judge comes out and he calls the case. And for the first time I see who C.J. Martin is. As he comes forward with his attorney and the Commonwealth's attorney and the state trooper all standing before the judge. The state trooper looks over his left shoulder and points a finger in my direction and says, you're a part of this now too. You better come on up here. I'm scared to death. I took a place beside Trooper Bird. The defense attorney tells the judge, Your Honor, we're prepared to accept a plea deal for improper driving. The judge looks back at him. Improper driving? I got 2 dead people here. Somebody's going to have to explain something to me. And he swears to sin and he asks Trooper Bird to give an account. Well, I was struggling the first time I heard Trooper Bird give me the account. Now that I'm standing next to him and he's doing it for me the second time, it's easier for me to understand and accept the circumstances. God was preparing me a few minutes before for what I was going to experience. And he gets done with his report. And he says, Your Honor, there's 2 more things you need to know. This is J.T. Clark. He's the brother and brother-in-law of the 2 that were killed. And he intends to pay any fine you impose in this case. And with that, C.J. Martin lost it. He's crying out, Oh my Jesus. Sobbing, uncontrollably. Because as you see, the first time, he understands that I did not come there to come against him. He did not know that. The judge turned his head, looked at me sideways, and said, What in the world would you do that for? Your Honor, our family's already moved on a path of forgiveness toward Mr. Martin. And frankly, actions speak louder than words. If my being here and paying his fine helps him to accept and receive that forgiveness so that he can continue to do what he's called to do in this life, so that he can enjoy his family, enjoy his wife, Your Honor, that's what I'm here to do. We love Mr. Martin. And the judge picks up a piece of paper. He said, a few minutes ago, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to accept the charge of improper driving. And now I'm writing on this piece of paper that the fine is $5. And with that, the case was adjudicated. And I walked over and grabbed Mr. Martin in a bear hug. And I held on to him. We shut that courtroom down. For 5 minutes, nobody dared move a muscle. The only thing that moved in that courtroom was tears flowing down people's faces. I said, I got you, brother. I said, it's going to be all right. And we walked out to settle things up with the clerk. He invited me to his church. I went there on November 8th for the first time. And as he tried to introduce me to his congregation, his voice was choked. And I got up out of my seat one more time and I came up to him and I grabbed him up in a hug. And I said those words again. It's going to be all right. And a few seconds later, I turned to go back to my seat and there was a line of 30 people waiting to give me a hug. And the sermon ended. The message was, obedience brings blessing. I'll never forget it. Because in my life, I had viewed obedience as something like an ATM machine. Okay, God, I was obedient. Where's my blessing? And CJ had lived an obedient life, and his blessings were stored up and poured out on him in the circumstances of this accident. And one of the deacons and leaders of his church pulled me aside after the sermon was over, and I said, I want you to look around this room. Our church is less than 2 years old. If you and your family hadn't acted in the way that you did, all these people would have been affected because our church wouldn't have continued. On November 22nd, I went back to his church. I was there on the 15th and again on the 22nd. 45 minutes into Bible study, the door swung open, and 30 members of the biker church rolled into the African American church to worship in unity together. Standing to the left is Mike Price, the pastor of Trash Ministries. C.J. Martin is in the middle, and I'm on the other side. One of the things, and I shared this with CJ in his church in Sunday school on the 16th of January, when I was trying to learn and understand what forgiveness meant in my life in 2009, I thought it was just about, I forgive you and I move on. And what God has been teaching me through all of this, if I allow Him to be a part of it, if I allow Him to be the focus of the forgiveness, He's shown me that forgiveness is also about removing barriers to people being able to accept and receive it. How easy does it make it for us to receive His love and forgiveness? Two weeks ago, I was listening to a radio station while I was at work. You had the clip. And this audio clip came on My Journey FM radio. And as I listened to it, I thought to myself, oh my goodness, that person's been through the same thing I went through. And then I realized that was my voice. It's about a minute long. And I'll finish with what I started with. All glory goes to God.